Do you or does the UK government believe that Israel is weaponising food? Is it using starvation as a weapon of war?
That's not the judgment the UK government has drawn.
No aid workers have gone in or out through that crossing, and separately Karam Sharom in the immediate area facility is currently being bombed as well.
Israel has not shown us a plan, a credible plan of one evacuation.
Can I take you back to what you talked about the food and the famine in Gaza? On May the 6th, the United Nations said there is a full-blown famine in northern Gaza. Does the UK government accept that there is a famine in Gaza?
I think if you're referring to the IFP reports that came out as well, I think that's why we've pressed on the issue of the Erez crossing. I think we're on the brink of famine. I'll ask Stephen to come in. I haven't yet seen a specific report, but whether we're on the brink or we're in famine, the fact is, there is malnutrition. Evidence of that is very clear. The facilities in hospitals is dire, and people are dying because of a lack of medicine, support and basic amenities, and we need to ensure that that happens. We shouldn't wait for famine to occur. We need to act and act now.
Well, why, in your opinion, or in the opinion of the UK government, why is there a famine in Gaza?
Well, I think the straight answer to that is very much because of the restrictions which are imposed on aid getting in through the borders.
So, do you then believe that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war?
I think those assessments we make constantly. I think the Foreign Secretary over the weekend again said very clearly about that there's no clean bill of health for Israel in any shape or form. There's constant reviews which take place on the way Israel is prosecuting this war. And I think Israel needs to recognise that the situation in Gaza, they as the occupying power under the Geneva Conventions have direct responsibilities, and they need to ensure that the food, the medicines, the support, the humanitarian aid that's needed needs to get in and get in now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but if I go back to my question, do you or does the UK government believe that Israel is weaponising food in terms of its delivery to Gaza? Is it using starvation as a weapon of war?
That's not the judgment the UK government has drawn, but what we have said very clearly is that we're on the brink of famine in Gaza. Food needs to get in, medicines need to get in, and Israel, just take a brief step back, why we hold Israel responsible and in the way we have quite directly is because Israel is signed up to these conventions. Israel is a state, and I agree with you, Brendan, it has obligations. You're asking for a specific analysis. That forms part and parcel of the assessments we make, and of course we're seized with the reports which are coming through. I proactively mentioned the IFP report. The assessment, if you're saying overall for the UK government, I've not seen an assessment that determination has been made. But what's very clear to me, the reality on the ground is that people are in need of food, in need of medicine, in need of humanitarian aid, and we need to ensure that we implore upon Israel to do all it can with its responsibilities it has as a established state on the world stage with obligations under the Geneva Convention as an occupying power to fulfill them, and it should be held accountable for those.
Yeah, but given that, how else would you explain children dying of hunger and malnutrition in an area of the world in which food is plentiful, just 44 miles from Tel Aviv, when the people who are responsible for the flow of that food is the Israeli government? So how else would you explain that happening if it's not being used as a weapon of war?
What's clearly happening in Gaza right now is aid is not getting through, food is not getting through, medicines are not getting through, and that's why the UK government, we've been focused with other partners, including those in the near vicinity. But you've asked me a specific question on a determination, and I said that assessment has not been made by the UK government.
You accept that aid is not getting through, you accept that food is not getting through, and the people that it has to come through, surely any determination has to say that those people are responsible for it not getting to where it needs to be, and therefore as the occupying power, surely there is a legal responsibility on them to do that. And if they don't do it, then they are indeed weaponising it.
And what I'm saying is those assessments are constantly and consistently made, and our relationship with Israel means that we're able to land those messages quite directly to them. You asked a specific question on assessment made, and I understand that. But as I said to you, is that, yes, when we look at the situation on the ground, I could stand here and say, look, we've got so much aid in through airdrops, but compared to a proportionality of what needs to happen, it is not enough. It's clearly not enough. And we need to ensure that this issue, the report, certainly the last one I read, was that there was a risk of famine, and a real risk of famine, particularly in northern Gaza, which was the IFP report. And we need to ensure, and that's why we pressurised Israel to get the Erez crossing opening. I'm not accepting for a moment, Brendan, that it's, for example, some of the, we managed to get aid in flour through Ashdod, which was going through the Erez. It got attacked. And that needs to ensure, and yes, we have made that point directly to the Israelis, that those who are attacking these convoys should be held accountable. You've asked for a specific point of determination. I've been clear on that. But whatever happens from here on in and in the future, we keep this issue under really, really strict scrutiny to ensure that its obligations of Israel, and that's why people say Hamas are doing this. Of course, there's issues of distribution. The distribution channels in Gaza at the moment are really challenged. But at the same time, the first obligation, the difference between Hamas and Israel is a state. It's a partner, it's an ally to the United Kingdom, and we need, and I assure you, we use every diplomatic lever quite directly and quite bluntly with Israel to ensure that they recognise their obligations in this respect.
Just briefly on that, Minister, humanitarian aid organisations tell me that not a single aid delivery has gone through the Rafah crossing since the 6th of May, which obviously was the primary delivery route. That also means there have been no medical evacuations of Gazans through that route, no aid workers have gone in or out through that crossing, and separately, Karam Sharom in the immediate area vicinity is currently being bombed as well, and therefore that is highly affecting whether or not aid is getting in. Is it true that no aid has got in through the Rafah crossing since the 6th of May?
Yeah, the Rafah, Stephen may correct
Rafah.
me, but the last report last night, there was no opening, and that's why, again, I said the crucial part of Rafah was that's where mainly the fuel crossing was going. And again, to kind of give you a real-life insight into it, one of the things yesterday I was exploring with Mark Bryson Richardson, our ambassador, who I engage with practically every other day. He's in Israel as I speak. And one of the points we're raising directly is, one, either get Rafah open, or Karim Shalom has the capability and capacity to provide fuel. And fuel is needed. Coming back to some points Brendan also alluded to, I'm very clear on this. The fuel is needed to run the hospitals. And if the hospitals don't get fuel, the very issues that we just talked about will be further exacerbated. So those points we're very much seized by them. But the fact is, yes, in the direct answer, Rafah remains closed. Stephen, I don't think it's opened, has it?
That's correct, Minister. No aid has flowed through the Rafah crossing in recent days, and it is an urgent priority that the crossing is open again, that Karim Shalom is opened again, and that more aid, in addition to those two crossings, can enter through other crossings such as Eretz and also through the north so that goods from Ashdod could come into Gaza. So it's an urgent priority, and we are working this. As the Minister said, our humanitarian envoy, Mark Bryson Richardson, is in Israel today raising this. The Foreign Secretary spoke to Foreign Minister Katz yesterday and to Ron Dermer, and we're pressing this very hard.
Thank you, Bob.
Just to follow up that point, from the diplomatic cables, reports that you get from our embassy in Israel, what are our diplomats telling you about how much Israel is focusing when it comes to targeting, how much Israel takes into account issues of proportionality? So to what extent, just related to Brendan's point, to what extent is the deaths of civilians due to a sort of sense of negligence or to an attempt at proportionality, but you're dealing with targeting Hamas terrorists in a very crowded space in which there are many other human beings? What are your diplomats on the ground telling you?
Well, I think the current live situation, if we take Rafah, I think the diplomatic pressure that's been exerted by ourselves, but also in particular by the United States, has resulted in a more restrained operation compared to what we saw in Gaza City and Khan Yunis. Does Israel have the capacity and capability to comply on the obligations? Yes, we believe it does. It's got one of the most advanced militaries in the world. On the issue of the prosecution of the war, as I said, this is something which is looked at intensely and regularly by us in making our own assessments, but also Israel has direct obligations through the conventions that it also has to be adhering to on the issue of proportionality as well. But our own assessment, you asked about what's coming through from our missions on the ground, is very clear that currently, and as I said, this thing can change very, very quickly, that the operation in Rafah compared to what happened in Gaza City or Khan Yunis has not been to the scale and intensity that those two operations took place. However, I would add, and this is very much sees, there's no plan. Israel has not shown us a plan, a credible plan of one evacuation, because again on these principles, humanitarian is an important principle. Al-Mawasi, where the people from Rafah are being sent, which is now circa about 400,000 that have been moved. You get a leaflet in the morning saying you must move by the afternoon. It's a pretty stark choice, and people have that. I mean, if nothing else, we've seen the resilience of the way the Palestinians have moved from one place to the other. But Israel, and we do this consistently, and as Stephen alluded to in recent calls that the Foreign Secretary's had, is their obligations to the very principles you've just mentioned.
Brendan.
Minister, you and your fellow ministers, indeed the government, often talk about Israel's capacity and capability to adhere to international humanitarian law. Now, I have the capacity and the capability to do many things. Doesn't mean I always do them. And given what you've just said about the Rafah crossing being closed and no aid coming in since the 6th, talking about the famine that is either there or on the brink, can you honestly say that Israel's activities demonstrate a commitment to respecting international humanitarian law?
I think Israel's obligations to IHL is very clear for them to see. We have an assessment procedure, and I'm sure you'll respect this, Brendan, that we go through, and through those assessment procedures I very clearly give my perspectives as a minister for the Middle East in how I perceive this on the information which is given. An overall assessment is made, and a determination is made after that of the British government's position. That's happened before. It happens on a revolving basis. What's very clear to me, I think the challenges are intense and immense on IHL, and from what we've already discussed, I think it's very clear from what my thinking is. I think Israel is really leaving many of its partners, including ourselves, pretty challenged on where we are currently on the issue of IHL and how they are fulfilling their obligations. But I would add quite clearly that there is a established process which the Foreign Secretary has talked about repeatedly, which he ultimately opines on from the information he receives, and those assessments happen. This isn't a case of saying there's a green light to Israel. Israel has obligations. We are allies of Israel, and as a constructive friend to Israel, we land these points very directly to them. But at the same time, we make these assessments consistently. All the points you've made, there's been nothing I've disagreed with in what you're saying, and I said those should lend into what happens from here on in, and future decisions that are made will be based on some of these assessments and some of the points that we've been discussing. And these happen at a very regular and periodic level, which allows us to make a determination. But I'm not going to preempt a determination of a process.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying, and as I said earlier on, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but the actions of the UK government just don't chime. The Foreign Secretary, as you alluded to earlier, on Sunday said that Israel does not have a clean bill of health when it comes to its military operations in Gaza. And just yesterday, US Secretary of State Blinken said, given the totality of the damage that's been done to children, women and men, it was reasonable to assess that in certain circumstances Israel acted in a way which is not consistent with international humanitarian law. Now, he was talking there about the munitions that has not been sent from the United States. So given their concerns, given the Foreign Secretary's admission about not having a clean bill of health, why then are we continuing to licence arms export to Israel?
Well, I think on that final point, you would have heard the Foreign Secretary consistently say, yes, our arms exports, there's a process involved with that. He is very much sticking to that process because this is something that we deploy in all conflicts with ever any shipments. There's no sort of state shipments of arms to Israel, as you know already, and whilst our position to the US is different, where I agree with you, there has to be that principle that applies, whether it's 1% or 90%, the principle should be, is there a contravention? And I think that assessment, as I've already alluded, is made in a robust way. It's something that is fed through from the advice that we see, including myself. I see that, I give my very clear opinion on that view, and that gets then taken up through the other assessments that the Foreign Secretary will make, and he'll make a decision on this. I think he also said very clearly on over the weekend that this is something that is done on an evolving and quite a dynamic basis, and he'll certainly be looking at advice, and some of the points you've just raised will be, I'm sure, points he'll reflect on as he considers that advice.